Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morgan, Rough Motor City Madmouth. This is our Hall of Fame edition here from Cooperstown, New York, and I am pleased to be joined by two incredible co-hosts tonight. I gotta get around with these guys because they're gonna bring the fountain of youth out of me. We have Eric and Justin of a combined age of 52, and yours truly kicking 60. So I have a lot of good youth here on display here on 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, and I'm looking forward to seeing the energy and the passion that these young guys have because guys like them are the future of the great American pastime. With that said, okay, I'll introduce Justin Wick, who is the communications supervisor for MLB's Arizona Fall League. And you say you're going on your second year, is that correct?
That's right. Yes, sir.
Very good. And of course, Eric Katz, Mr. Concrete Dump. All right, Eric, we got to give Justin the old concrete dump explanation that he doesn't know about, that you know a lot about.
Oh, I don't know if you remember the old Montreal Expos.
Oh, of
But
course.
their stadium, Olympic, where they played at Olympic Stadium, was just atrocious. So like it's made of concrete, so it's a big old O. So I call it a concrete dump, which I don't even which it also adds to my loathing of Canadian teams,
That's funny.
especially the Blue Jays.
Okay, there you have your brief explanation. So, what we're going to do here before we get into some Hall of Fame stuff, I want to direct this over to Justin. First of all, talk about your role with the Arizona Fall League and how did you get the job?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, thank you to the crew for bringing me on right here. I mean, it's always good to make a debut with a new little broadcast team right here. But as far as, just the course of study, where I've been, what I've been about these last several years, I finished up a college baseball career, I suppose 2019, 2020, right around that window. I graduate, I get my degree, and, it turns into as much as I want to stay on the field, it starts looking like I'm going to have to shift toward a press box eventually. But I was able to meet plenty of great people. I was able to land a writing job with SB Nation, which really got my foot in the door. And then I was able to work it up to eventually working for other sites like Pitcher List and a handful of guest appearances. So built up enough of a resume that I was able to put together, I mean, at least a comprehensive enough background for MLB to kind of take a look at me. And oddly enough, it was a LinkedIn advertisement for the Arizona Fall League, which
Oh,
me
really?
just so happened to live in Greater Phoenix. I was going, this is a no brainer. I love the league. I'm familiar with it. And, I applied, I interviewed, I was offered the job, and it was, again, pretty much a no brainer that that was something that I wanted to do. So they ran us through, last season was a whole lot of fun following all sorts of different prospects and, a lot of marquee names and a lot of executives and a lot of former players that were able to come through. I was thrilled to see the opportunities that came together in just one short year. And, when the opportunity came up to do it again, it didn't take me long to commit again for that second season, which we have coming up on October 3rd is actually our opening day when we'll get started back down here in Phoenix. So that's the track record for how it came together. I'm absolutely thrilled to make it happen, but it's very cool to be able to say, the MLB email address with your name on it. That's a pretty humbling moment once that comes through. But it's been a lot of fun, and I owe a lot to those guys for looking out for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. What's amazing about the whole thing is, I know that the Arizona Fall League, as I understand, is based in Scottsdale. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a handful. I know there's six different venues, but I mean the league headquarters. That is correct, right there in
Right.
Scottsdale.
Right. So, with that said, and I know we were talking before we went live here that you actually live in Chandler, Arizona. Once upon a time, that was where the Milwaukee Brewers trained at
That's right.
Compadre Stadium. I covered games there. And of course, you live in Chandler, where I actually happen to live too. So, you want to talk about the East Valley is well represented on this show. Indeed, it is. So, with that said, do you get a lot of media coverage for the Arizona Fall League? I know we talk about press boxes. We'll break it down into two parts. Okay, you have media coverage, and of course, you're going to get a lot of scouts showing up for these. Would you Would you say?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to see. Oh goodness, I'm sorry about that. It's interesting to follow along. I mean, the credential distribution that we have, it is primarily a lot of different scouts. I mean, it's funny. Derek Jeter came through with the Marlins last year, making sure he's getting a look at the prospects that he was able to work with. So I believe for the most part, it's been, I mean, it's fun to be able to see the media background and to recognize that, the different press box affiliates that we have, the different crews that are just rolling through. It is it's unique seeing, the big league press box that you'll see in a standard major league game versus the
Right.
standard outfitting that we have for the Arizona Fall League. There are a lot of similarities. It's a lot more, I mean, if I may, it's more laid back as far as, definitely more of a conglomerate of a whole lot of different people coming in. And I mean, any given Fall League game, you're going to see 10 different big league uniforms on the field, for example. So it's fun to see. It's very much a melting pot of all sorts of different people that really want, whether it be students trying to get their foot in the door or established writers with significant following or decades of service. It's you really never know who you're going to run into, and at the same time I've always felt like I've been able to have a great conversation with pretty much everybody that's ran through. So that's what gravitates me to the league. It's again just a whole different mix of a lot of different media people, but if I probably am speaking more accurately, a lot of different scouts, and that's where you get a lot of different attention. And I think that makes it that much more exciting, and that gives a lot more material for all of those writers to cover.
Yeah, but would you say that you get a lot of writers or not quite as many and you deal with more scouts?
As far as my particular duties, I am definitely working on the writing side, which it's funny to see the distribution of our staff. We have a lot more team operations or baseball ops fixated employees as opposed to our media department. So, we have allocated it. So I'm working mainly with the media representatives. But I mean, as far as the big picture, we do have a staff to be able to take on all of those inquiries. And, fortunately, I've been able to at least take a hold of the different media side of that thing.
All right. Eric, anything you want to add?
Like just being all that, is it like an opportunity for like people coming through there to kind of like network and things like that, as well as kind of cover to get their feet wet covering a game or a prospect or
Sure.
somebody?
That's funny you should say that. I am shocked to see how many people I have met in just the past 12 months in the game of baseball. So I mean, I remember I was just showing up at one of our just regular season games, and all of a sudden Rajai Davis comes walking in, and I'm just like, well, hey, how's it going? And we
Good player
shake
too.
hands, and it was like we were long lost friends. And I'm just like, it's something that you would never really fathom from the outside looking in. But all of a sudden,
Mhm.
interactions like that just became so familiar. Of all of a sudden I was riding an elevator with Derek Jeter, helping him out, just assisting with any miscellaneous task that you might need. And you start realizing in a hurry that there's a lot of different details that go into it. But just, I mean, as far as the networking side of things, that's what I've been able to get plenty of opportunities since then. And, seeing at least the resumes of people that have started in the Arizona Fall League and where they have gone. I know the head of communications for the Pittsburgh Pirates is somebody that was also a Fall League alumni on the employee side. So, hopefully, and I keep the fingers crossed, if we stay on the course, I feel like it's going to be a pretty good standing. But, it's nice to see that there's a lot of people that have paved the way.
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that still live out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of the name Tony DeMarco, but Tony DeMarco is actually my mentor in this business 42 years ago. I believe you probably run across Tony, haven't you, Justin?
That name sounds extremely familiar, and I'll make sure. I'm sure it'll be a matter of time before I see him again.
That might be. And not only that, Barry Bloom also lives out there in the Arizona area, and he's an iconic writer as well. I could see Tony or Barry in the writers' wing in the Hall of Fame, hopefully one of these days. So, with that said, okay, tell me some of your goals in baseball.
Sure. I think there's always a pursuit for, just encouraging people to think for themselves. And this is something, as far as the tangible items of, yes, you want to establish a following. Yes, you ideally want to make a living doing this. And I mean, I know for a lot of people that would absolutely love to be able to be in baseball full time. And I think of, what the more gratifying side of this is, and trying to find, what is the ulterior purpose? Like, what is it that you find the greatest level of fulfillment with? And something that I've always really tried to foster, whether it be my writing or just the way I interact with people in a press box, is, first of all, I want people to love the game as much as I do. And I think that's just prerequisite for everybody that's kind of in this field. But, I've found a lot of comfort in, if I set this of a goal in that, every waking hour, encourage people to be happier and encourage them to think for themselves. Because, it's very difficult to be able to just follow the pack in the game of baseball, as many people can attest to. And, certainly in my playing career, I felt like I really had to take control of my own development in order to get as far as I wanted to. So I look at, especially in a media sense, I've always felt like, if you work hard and if you're a good person, it is going to work out for you. And as far as, what is it that I want to work out long term, it's really that focus of making sure that, you're empowering people to create comprehensive thought processes to be able to be more passionate about what they do. And I understand maybe that's kind of that's not exactly the standard response to a long-term goal, I suppose, but that's something that I feel like if I'm able to fulfill that, everything else will follow. So hopefully, that kind of course of study, or that at least priority, I would love to be able to be in a communications department full time. I jokingly said when I was younger, well, actually not jokingly, I was serious, saying when I was younger and people asked what I wanted to do, I told them I either wanted to be Jimmy Fallon hosting the Tonight Show, I wanted to be Clayton Kershaw as a big league starter, or I wanted to be Vin Scully in a big league press box. And I feel like, as long as I'm at least setting tangible, like measurable details for how I can get there, and at least fill some kind of duty. I don't know what that duty could be long term, but I do feel like, if I do those things, it'll at least pan out.
Well, I got news for the Arizona Fall League's a good opportunity. It's not like you're dealing with the New York Penn League, and nothing against the New York Penn League. It was a short season Class A league, but Arizona Fall League, as I understand it, the best prospects get sent over there. And again, they're playing in big league parks. I've been to all the Cactus League stadiums is what I've done, and had an opportunity to go there. So it's a pretty good thing. We're going to do one more thing about the Arizona Fall League, and then I'm going to hit you guys both with some topics out of the Baseball Hall of Fame. And that being, what are some of the top prospects in the Arizona Fall League? And give everyone an overview of the league in general. But let's start with the top prospects.
It's funny to see, just the kind of rotating carousel of different players. Typically, it is mainly AA and AAA guys from the previous calendar year. So, I guess this year we'll probably have a bunch of AA and AAA guys again. You had, the notable names of last season was Mackenzie Gore and Spencer Torkelson. So, of course, Mackenzie Gore being one of the key players in that Juan Soto deal between San Diego and Washington. Getting the opportunity to see him go to work on a mound in, a very intimate setting where I suppose that's probably going to be moving forward, assuming he stays in the big leagues. That could very well be the fewest fans that he will ever pitch in front of again, just based on the way it works when you make it big. So seeing that and feeling like you're ahead of the curve, that was something that I thought was really cool. And of course, with Spencer Torkelson, he was, of course, an alumni of Arizona State. So there was a little bit more of a following here in Arizona whenever he was on the diamond. But I would say, those two guys certainly stand out. A handful of players that just had dominant performances. I know there's a reliever for Toronto named Graham Spraker. He didn't give up a run while he was down here. The dominant guy. He was the go-to.
I know the guy. I went to college with him.
There you go. That's right.
I saw him pitch in college. I remember when the scouts were, the people from the Mets were out, the Cubs. All sorts of people. He was a good pitcher. We still talk every now and then.
He's still doing it, man.
Yeah, didn't you mention JJ Bleday is another guy out of the Marlins system that you talked about?
Yes, that's right.
So
yes, JJ Bleday was certainly one of the more dominant players that we have, and probably one of the more marquee dudes. I know he shared an outfield with the team that he was with Cameron Meisner. And he's now, of course, traded to the Tampa Bay Rays from the Marlins. So kind of silly that, here he was wearing the Marlins jersey, and then he ended up being dealt over the course of the offseason. But, certainly as far as the Florida presence that they were able to put together, some very quality outfielders in that set. And the team that the Marlins were with, they happened to win the Arizona Fall League Championship last year, and they had a pretty good showing going for them.
What team was that?
That was the Mesa Solar Sox, based out of the spring training home of the Chicago Cubs. And if I'm not mistaken, last year, the Cubs, the A's, the Marlins, and a handful of other teams were all just kind of in the melting pot of all the different big league uniforms they had. But, they were able to put a good showing. Graham Spraker was their closer. He actually closed out the championship. And that was probably the best. That was certainly the best squad that we had anyways.
I think Spraker's probably going to end up being like a reliever, closer kind of guy.
Yeah, who's the manager?
I'm on board.
Who's the manager of that team, Justin?
The manager was with the Cubs. His name was Lance Reimel, and to my knowledge, in 2020, he was the bullpen catcher for the Cubs during the COVID year. So he was in the Cubs bubble.
Okay, so let's segue a little bit
from minor league ranks, but very nice guy.
Let's segue a little bit from the Arizona Fall League, where a lot of these guys look to get to the big leagues, and eventually here in Cooperstown. And I'm going to go rapid fire with both you and Eric. Okay, first of all, as you know, I'm here at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. So since I'm here, do you think that Pete Rose ever gets in? I know that the stores are selling T-shirts, trying to get him in. and there are lots of mentions of him in the museum because it is a museum of history. So, all right, Justin, I'm going to go to you first. Eric, after he's done, you're going to answer the question, and I got 5 topics to talk about. So you're up first here, Justin. Pete
I'll
Rose,
keep it
never getting it.
concise. Sure, I won't take the good stuff away from Eric by any means. I would say certainly all-time hit leader. I mean, that's the easy, low-hanging fruit of if that is a guy that's been able to put that together. It makes pretty clear sense that by that logic, he should be in if you had more hits than anybody else. I think that if you're going to at least define what is the protocol that you're going to set forth, if you're going to keep the steroid users out, if you're going to keep anybody with a history of domestic violence out, you need to keep the gamblers out. You need to keep, any sense of if there is a moral compass that really goes into the balloting process. It's very challenging because you're going to start comparing one story against the other, going, well, yes, he did this really unacceptable thing, but he also played this good. So at what point does it wash itself out? There's a lot of there's uncertainty there. I would certainly like to think, just for the sake of, if it is a measure of talent, he should certainly be in there. But the older I'm getting and the more I'm realizing through the voting process what actually transpires, I think that, it's, I don't necessarily think that it's fair to denounce him for what he accomplished on the field and to really look over it. And I know some people will really say that, what is the validity of the Hall of Fame if the all-time hit leader isn't in it? But, all the while, if moral compass is certainly a measuring stick for what the writers are taking a side on, I suppose, I understand it. And Eric's probably looking at me going, that was the most passive response that I could put together. But, I think that just kind of sums up where it is. And, I suppose as much as I do personally feel like he should be in just being the hit leader. But, if you're going to put a measuring stick of just being a good person and acting within the rules, I suppose it's at least somewhat comforting to realize that, maybe there actually is a good presence going on for treating this the way it needs to be respected.
Okay, Eric, take it from there.
Yeah, going back to what Nick had said, Justin had said, there's with David Ortiz, the problem that brings is, number one, you basically open the floodgate for steroid users.
Well, Eric, let's stay on point with Pete Rose first, okay? We'll go in order. We'll get to Ortiz later, but we're going to start with Pete Rose, all right?
Okay, Pete Rose, I have to say no, because, Joe Jackson has been barred from the Hall of Fame, and he played a lesser role in the White Sox gambling, and his numbers are just, for a hitter, absolutely off the charts. But Rose knew what he was doing. There's a rule explicitly written in all 30 MLB locker rooms saying, don't do that or this will happen.
Right.
And Rose thought he was invincible. And yes, he's the all-time hits leader, but the fact of the matter is he gambled, and MLB says, and that ultimately hurts the integrity of the game. There's nothing MLB hates more than the integrity being messed with. I know, yes, MLB today is just big into gambling, which obviously that's a big revenue source for them. But the fact of the matter is the players aren't doing it. And Rose was betting, obviously for his team, but still he was betting. Well, the thing about it is, let's just say you gamble, and then you're talking to the guy, you gamble on a team, and then when you're playing that team, you're next to those, you happen to be next to those guys in the clubhouse. But the fact of the matter is, Rose messed up, and now he's in a prison without bars.
Well, okay. Well, I'll just give you a brief perspective. Pete Rose eventually gets in when he's dead. They won't give him the gratification while he's alive, but we'll take it from there. All right, just to let everybody know, you can subscribe to the South Florida Tribune on our YouTube channel, or visit by going to youtube.com at South Florida Tribune and click the subscribe button, or visit www.southfloridatribune.com and follow us on Twitter at Tribune South. To advertise, call 954-304-4941. The audio portion of the show can be heard on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. So where you'll find us, wherever you want to find us. And please subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. Have a lot of great videos in and out of sports, and we hope you can benefit by them. So, yeah, summarizing my thought, I think Pete Rose gets in when he's dead. There's no way that anybody in their right mind would give him the satisfaction while he's alive. Everything you said, Eric, was on point. He knew what he was getting into. It's all written on the on the wall, and he did it anyways. He broke the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught, and he did. Of course, and then it doesn't help that he's showing up the Hall of Fame by doing book signings right down the street, Main Street, while they're going on. So you're talking about a cash grab too. So,
or he was just, or the fact that he just lied about it for years at a time till in 2004 he decides to come clean.
Well, either way, sometimes the cover up is worse than the crime, and I guess that speaks volumes. So now that we'll move on from Pete Rose, and I can tell you right now, I saw a nice display on Ichiro Suzuki. Do you guys think he becomes a first ballot Hall of Famer, considering what he did in Japan and as well as what he did with the Mariners? You know what, Eric, I'm going to let you lead off with this one, and Justin, you can piggyback off of Eric this time. We're going to rotate you guys back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. He set the single season record for hits. He's got in America. He's got over 3,089 hits, and considering how late he came over, that's a pretty big accomplishment in and of itself. He obviously proved he could be one of the best outfielders of all time, and he was just unbelievable throughout his career in Seattle. I mean, how can he not be a first ballot Hall of Famer when the first thing you do, you come over as a rookie, mind you, and you go ahead and light up the league and break the single season hits record? I mean, he has to be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Okay, Justin, where are you at with this?
I like those points, and I'm thinking as far as, certainly as far as, the actual track record of what he's been able to put together as a player speaks for himself. I think that, as far as recognizing this, you need to get in the mind of the average writer and the actual ballot holder and how they'd like to go about it. And I mean, as silly as this may seem, Mariano Rivera, as one of the more, I think it's safe to say, one of the more likable players in the history of the game, I don't really think that it's a surprise that somebody, certainly, I mean, his body of work spoke for itself, but just, the morally upstanding guy of, he was always, nobody had anything bad to say about that guy. I think that in the end of the day really helped him reach the unanimous status of, actually getting in with 100% of the vote. So I think about, where does Ichiro stand on this? I don't think that there are a lot of people that really have anything bad to say about Ichiro for the same reason of, him being the cultural icon of, coming over to the United States, being such an enamored figure, and just continually being at the forefront of just mastering his craft. I think that, as far as what it takes to persuade different writers and to get them, I suppose, on their voting side, I think that kind of speaks for itself as far as the likeliness of seeing, I mean, not only just a first ballot sense of how he'll be able to get there, but I feel like if there was any doubt as far as, let's say he was on the fence of reaching that 75% mark in year one, I think that anything that he did just as a person, that could very well push him far beyond there.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about Ichiro Suzuki, I mentioned the words first ballot Hall of Famer, and I did that purposely. Okay, he's getting in on the first ballot. What he did in Japan and what he did in the United States, and he started out with the Seattle Mariners. He didn't start out with the New York Yankees. Okay, and you know what? But the one thing these Japanese players do, and I noticed this when Shohei Ohtani was in Miami, and I had a chance to cover him when he was pitching that night. These guys bring a ton of media people into their building. I mean, you talk about press boxes being full, photo walls being packed. I mean, I had a chance actually at Tempe Diablo Stadium, and I'm sure this name probably rings a bell, Justin. Tim Mead. I don't know if he rings a bell. One of my really good friends who used to be the president of the Hall of Fame. He credentialed me anyways, and I saw the incredible media covers that even a spring training game is for Shohei Ohtani. So I'll just say right now with Shohei Ohtani, okay, I know I hate to predict future Hall of Famers, but he's one I could certainly do. But Ichiro Suzuki is a first ballot Hall of Famer, not a Hall of Famer. And I'll leave it at that. All right, we'll move on to the next one. And all right, Eric, this is your opportunity to talk about David Ortiz. We're going to let you do it now. And then that's going to lead me over to something else. So here's how I'm going to mention it, okay? Let's first of all, I want you both to give me your thoughts of this year's Hall of Fame class. And then, Eric, I'll transition over to Ortiz in a moment.
Okay. Well,
go ahead, Eric.
Okay, this year's Hall of Fame class. I mean, it's kind of now we're entering where the Hall of Fame writers have been reluctant to go, which is the steroid era. Right. And obviously Bonds. I really think Bonds should be in. I think, but the problem now though is when you let one in, you got to let them all in.
Right.
And this year, we're in the steroid era, and that's the eligible that's the eligible candidates we have right in front of us right now, which they were, good. They were obviously great players. Obviously, I think Todd Helton should get in finally. And I think Scott Rowland should get in because he came he had 63% last year. So
Yeah, but I want to talk about the 2022 class, Eric.
okay, well, the problem with it is, they just didn't. I thought Todd Helton should have been in. I mean, great
Okay.
player. Obviously, I don't know why they used Colorado against them. They let Larry Walker in, and Todd Helton was a great player over there in his own right. And I just think that this year, I think they kind of got it wrong because the MLB Hall of Fame, the writers essentially broke their own rule, saying we're not going to elect steroid users, and they decide to elect David Ortiz, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with David Ortiz, great player and obviously a very likable guy,
Right.
but and obviously one of the best when it came to being clutch in the postseason at my expense some of the time. And so I just think that it's, it just wasn't, I just think that this year's class, it just, some of these, it just, it was just unfortunate though. But the thing is, the Hall of Fame, they didn't want to go another year without electing somebody because they already get enough flack for who they vote for. But I just think that this year, essentially you just opened the floodgate saying now guys like Clemens, Bonds, maybe even Sosa, and perhaps Kurt Schilling eventually. They, now you got to elect other steroid users. I mean, Ortiz was linked to it in 2003 when this thing really started to get out of control.
That's funny too. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Well, I think the thing that made this year's Hall of Fame class intriguing, and yeah, Eric, you were dancing around it, that Ortiz was anonymously linked to it, but I think the word that Eric mentioned was likable, and that's what probably helped him get in. It's not like he got in convincingly, but what made this Hall of Fame class interesting is Ortiz was the lone one from the writers, but then you had Tony Oliva, I believe, that got in, and Jim Cott, Minnie Minoso, and Buck O'Neill. So you had a credible class, albeit that class came from the veterans committees to get these other ones to make it a formidable class where nobody was left out of the show. But yeah, Eric, you're right. Ortiz got in. And again, I do agree that Larry Walker, I think will get in. Schilling, if he can keep his mouth shut, would have been in. You don't sit there and tell the writers, don't vote for me. That's considered idiot thinking there. It really is. I mean, I think Kurt Schilling's one of the most clutch performers in the postseason on the planet, but he's got to keep his mouth shut and quit aggravating people. And again, like Barry Bonds, don't bite the hand that could eventually land you in the Hall of Fame. And Schilling did that with some of his actions. All right, Justin, pick it up from there because then I want to talk about McGuire and Sosa in a moment. But go ahead, Justin.
Sure, and I mean, I think the David Ortiz discourse, I mean, that is spot on. And I mean, I mentioned Mariano Rivera and Ichiro in the same likable category. Something that I continue to try to look upon, and this is, I remember that this. I don't mean to take this too far off course, but when Derek Jeter was inducted, somebody kind of brought the premise of, let's say he was a lifer with, let's say the Kansas City Royals, and maybe he didn't have many postseason appearances. How much of his voting premise, or how much was his stock increased just because he was on the team that he was, and every single time you turned your TV on in October, he was there. So I think that's something certainly with David Ortiz. You see what he was able to put together with a lot of postseason runs. And, for the sake of Ken Griffey Jr. not being able to get that, certainly that didn't cost him in voting. And I mean, he clearly proved himself as an over 90% ballot guy. But I think that, you look at the bias that goes into the voting selections,
Right.
and something that really stood out to me, there was a book that was released by Brian Kenny with MLB Network, and he was talking about Hall of Fame voting, and he brought up an idea of just player A and player B, comparing, here's the career body of work. One of them was Jack Morris, and another was Mickey Lolich, which I suppose you could call him kind of the Bartolo Colon of his era. Yeah. So, I mean, like Brian Kenny's presenting this saying, what separated the two? Well, Mickey Lolich looked like a pizza guy, whereas Jack Morris looked like out of the mound, and he had one really good postseason game that a lot of people remember him for. But, in the big picture, what is it that separates these two guys? So I think that there's a lot of predispositions involved. I wish that there were more clear-cut guidelines as far as, yes, when you leave it up to the writers, it is certainly subject to their expertise and it should be valued. I mean, that is certainly an earned right to be able to get a ballot like that. But I can't help but wonder, the bias that goes into these selections. There already are.
Right.
I mean, it's hard enough to get this down to one number, much less all the different opinions that go into it. But I think that could have been a big contributing factor for why Ortiz pulled as high as he is. I think that could be a contributing factor why, Todd Helton, outside of a pennant in 2007, that's the only thing that he really has to his name. But I wish that there was a way to strip that down to be able to get it on a more concentrated scale of, what did this particular person do? And, that's, again, I guess you can put this on any different comparison on what somebody really is voting for, but that was something that really stood out to me. I do think Ortiz, I mean, for better or for worse, he was getting in. I mean, no matter what, just based on what he was able to accomplish. But, I can only help but maybe it would be a little different if he had the career in the placement where Todd Helton was. And, we could be looking at a whole different thing just based on, sadly enough, physical appearance and the team that these guys play for.
It's funny you talk about Mickey Lodes being a pizza guy. By the way, after his career ended, he went out there and sold donuts in Metro Detroit. So we're too far off as far as the carbs.
There you go.
But now let's talk about Mickey Lolich for a moment, a guy that I have worked with in the past. He's been on one of my shows, and I got to do it through one of my Hall of Fame writers, Tom Gage. And of course, it felt like home to me there because I had Ernie Harwell, one of the greatest announcers ever, who won the Ford Frick Award a year ahead of Vin Scully. And then Joe Falls and Tom Gage are in there. But Mickey Lolich racked up a lot of complete games, threw a lot of strikeouts, a great left-hander. It outdueled Bob Gibson, and I think he definitely belongs in the Hall of Fame. So, yeah, again, sometimes you don't know the guidelines, well, who should be what. I think it'll always be a big debate why Lolich didn't get in. Jim Cott did, but I think it comes down to the fact that Lolich doesn't have as many wins. But who's going to forget the 68 World Series Tigers and whether they should have gotten more guys in? We'll leave that for another debate because then again, you'll all wonder about Luke Whitaker not getting in either because he wasn't quite particularly nice to the media for what I've heard, but we're not going to go off on that tangent. So with that said, okay, I think the things that helped Ortiz get in were one, he went out there and helped break the curse, and Boston won a few titles under him, number one. And then the other thing, too, with Ortiz is he was likable. So with that said, all right, let's go ahead. And you guys have already answered the question, could we see more PED users get in? I guess it's safe to say, Eric and Justin, right, that Roger Clemens is inevitable, Barry Bonds is inevitable, and I don't see Rafael Palmeiro ever getting in. Sosa and McGuire, I don't know. We'll see. But what people have to understand about Sosa and McGuire is the fact that they may have taken this stuff, and Sosa's pretty well known for his court bat, too, where he did get caught doing that.
I remember that.
Yeah, I know. And I worked with Sammy, too, Justin, back in 1987. So as his director of public relations. So, but that said, they also had a display with Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa. So they do allude to the steroid thing as part of a museum. Because again, I emphasize a Hall of Fame is history is really what it is. So, all right. So why don't you both give me your thoughts on Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa? We're going to lead off with you, Justin.
Man, I can't help it. I liked how Eric started off talking about Pete Rose saying he knew what the punishment was for gambling. And I mean, that was clear cut. It was posted in the clubhouse. And performance enhancing drugs just over the past couple decades. I mean, I get that it's been around, but I mean, compared to the duration of how long baseball's been around, it's a relatively new type of thing. I mean, this hasn't been, Bo Jackson didn't have this at his disposal. I mean, a lot of these other players, there was no question on whether or not they did or didn't because it didn't exist in those early stages of the game. And I mean, all the way up through the later decades. So I think that it's very challenging again because at least with gambling you knew that there was the ban, there is a complete just jurisdiction of this rules you out. But I think where it really gets murky is there wasn't anything, especially in the infancy stages of when performance enhancing drugs just started to come onto the scene. There wasn't any punishment that was known. And there wasn't really any reason to be aware of the punishment just because there wasn't anything proven yet. And it was so untraceable in the early stages when people started using it. So, I look at it and I think to myself, as far as if you knew you wouldn't get caught, I mean, let's say there was a player that knew they had the opportunity of doing this and there was never a question on whether or not they would or wouldn't get caught. I sadly think that a lot of players probably would do it just because, this is their livelihood and this is what they do. And, it's, you find something you love and let it kill you. Well, I don't think that it's appropriate to just be putting needles in your arm over and over again for that sake. But
Right.
I think that it was so tough because, this is your livelihood and this is the way you play the game. And, I don't want anybody, well, no, that isn't the way you play the game. But I mean, that's one way to make sure that you stay and inevitably be able to get what you really want out of the game of baseball. So I say that because I don't want anybody to think that I'm defending them because I mean, that's certainly, I mean, that's an irreprehensible damage to your career. But I think it's really difficult because there are no guidelines as far as those early stages of what they were doing. Nobody told them they were wrong when they started doing it because nobody knew about it. So, I mean, maybe, yes, you knew the artificial power that you were developing or the artificial prowess to be able to outlast other people. No, it isn't necessarily the ethical move, but there's a lot of unethical action that happens just in day-to-day life to begin with. So, I mean, I say that kind of as a roundabout way of saying, I think that it's very difficult to hold that against people when all they were trying to do was just be the best baseball players they were. But at the same time, if you violate a moral compass there, we see this with all different instances way beyond performance enhancing drugs in the Hall of Fame. If you violate a premise of, just the ethical code of what it means to be a competitor, I feel like that's a huge violation. And I think that's, I mean, a lot of writers agree for this, or these guys would be in by now. But I wish that there was a more clear cut rationale as far as, what are we really going to do with these guys? But even if you did do that, I think it gets really murky because, if you did performance enhancing drugs today versus if you did it about 20 years ago, it's on a completely different scale. And, we live in a reality now where it's banned and that it's not like appropriate. And I think that it was a little bit different just a couple decades ago.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about this before I turn it over to Eric is, first of all, when Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were having that home run chase, which, by the way, baseball was in the gutter because of that devastating 94 strike, don't tell me that the owners were complaining about fans showing up early for batting practice for both of them, hitting them out of the park and benefiting off the concession stands, the souvenir stands, etc. So I realized what they did wasn't certainly anything that people, when they look at them, that their stats are very misleading. But I think at some point, like Eric had mentioned earlier, at what point are they all going to be in, and are you going to finally be the icebreaker to get them in? And and I think that's where maybe the floodgates will come out. All right, Eric, give us your take here, and let make sure that everybody can see you wide and clear, my friend, because now I want to get the reaction of Mr. Concrete Dump about what he thinks of Sosa and McGwire.
Well, you had, I mean, well, we sure as hell were entertained back in the day when McGwire and Sosa were hitting Titanic home runs every night. But and then baseball's fans were coming back in droves after the devastation of 1994. I don't think baseball would have recovered had we not had that. And Bud Selig was ultimately willing to just let the show go on, let the money come in. And then about a decade or so, close to a decade later, he decides to drop the hammer, saying this was wrong. Heck, he was the guy thanking them for the great home run race on that stage at Busch Stadium.
No kidding. Yeah, no, I'm with you all the way there.
And matter of fact, I'm surprised they didn't hold Bud Selig out because Selig, it happened under his watch. Wouldn't you want to give him some probation too?
Yeah, but the only problem with him is he's stuffing the owner's pockets with great TV contracts. So every now and then you look at the other way based on the bottom line. But every point you make there, Eric, is very valid. I mean, nobody was going back, okay, to see Cal Ripken play, continue that streak. Don't get me wrong. If that streak had been compromised and they would have lost it, oh my goodness, baseball. Who knows if it would have ever recovered, but it did. It was intact. And then at that point, you had the home run chase between McGwire and Sosa. So, yeah, I mean, I understand that Bud Selig was the king of the castle collecting that money for the owners. So looking the other way. But now all of a sudden, McGwire and Sosa are dealing with double jeopardy that, hey, we helped bring the game back. Otherwise, the game would never have recovered. Now, whereas you can't say the same about Bonds with the Balco, and you can't say the same about Rafael Palmeiro, who had the guts to say that he didn't do it, waving the old finger and all that business. So, all right, well, we'll move on. I was just curious to get your guys' perspective on that. Now we're going to go on a little bit more of an upbeat question before we wrap up the broadcast. First of all, lots of Don Mattingly history in the Hall of Fame. Should he be in, Justin Wick?
I will put it this way. I hope that the lack of a championship does not hurt him. And I mean,
Right.
certainly looking at the body of work that he's done, he did it for the better part of 14 years. I mean, you could talk anything statistically you want. And I think it speaks for itself as far as, what he's been able to put together. He is, if I'm not mistaken, the longest tenured Yankee to never win a World Series. So, I mean, it's challenging. And again, for the same reason that I was talking about, holding a guy like Todd Helton out of the Hall of Fame, when you lack the team awareness, and I suppose you could say the same thing about, if if Sandy Alcantara for whatever reason doesn't receive the Cy Young this year, is it a product of the team that he's on rather than the pitcher that he is? I think that for Don Mattingly, is it a product of the body of work that he really put together as an individual, or is it the fact that whenever October came around, he was never really able to get it done like the other Yankees of, I guess the era before and after he did. So, the way that I say this is, it isn't the team name that goes on the bronze plaque. It is the individual's name that goes on the bronze plaque. So I'm certainly hoping that, for better or for worse, if there were any validity to, I mean, just if we were able to take championships completely out of the decision-making process, I am curious to see how the voting figures would be different. And, again, there's so many different priorities on what writers are going to accept. Are you going to say yes to Pete Rose and going to let him get a pass? Are you going to say no to the different PED users? Are you going to say yes to the guys that maybe didn't win a championship? Are you going to say yes to somebody that didn't have the figures, but they were on a lot of really good teams? And, again, it's a lot of bias that goes into it. And I think that's a big challenging sense. So I certainly hope that doesn't cost Don Mattingly as far as where the voting is. Again, I can't help but wonder, if there's a parallel universe out there where he did everything he did, but he happened to get one or two rings, what would that voting look like differently? But that's my ulterior premise on, hopefully that didn't cost him. And, again, I'd be really curious to see how it would shake up.
Well, I've actually compared Don Mattingly's stats to Kirby Puckett, and they're very comparable. And I think the only difference is that Kirby Puckett won 2 championships and Don Mattingly hasn't won any. And the teams were not as good when he played there at that time. But let me tell you, if you walk around the museum, you can tell there's a lot of Don Mattingly stuff in there. And I hope the Veterans Committee comes around to not only get Lolage in there, Lou Whitaker, but Don Mattingly certainly belongs there as well. All right, Eric, you're in the old Yankee hat, so talk about Donnie baseball.
Don Mattingly was really a bright spot for the Yankees during the 80s and otherwise some heartbreakingly dismal teams. I think that it's not his fault that during the 80s that the Yankees lacked pitching.
Right.
It's not his fault that they decided to trade away some promising prospects at that point in time for better hitters when, you trade a guy like Al Leiter away. It's not his fault that happened. It's not his fault that it was just him and Winfield just bashing. Don Mattingly had some weak teams around him, but he was still a bright spot on that team. MVP, Silver Slugger, multiple All-Star games. Carl Yastrzemski got into the Hall of Fame and he didn't win a World Series.
Good point. Good point. All right. Well, there you go. That's a good point.
There was plenty of great Red Sox players during the 70s and 80s who got into the Hall of Fame despite no World Series ring. Jim Rice never won a World Series ring, and he played for a long time. And he actually lost the World Series. But I don't know why we use that against Mattingly. I mean, he only went to the postseason once, which was like 1995, which was basically the end of his career, which you can say, oh, he quit too early. But no, the guy's body was breaking down at that point. Yeah. And he also had the back issue going for him back then. Right. But he was they call it the struggles during the struggles in and Don Mattingly for a reason. Don Mattingly was separate of that. He was a bright light on those Yankee teams of that were absolutely dismal to the point where they declined prior to George Steinbrenner being suspended.
Well, don't forget the fact that Don Mattingly's numbers retired with the Yankees as well, so they certainly recognize what he did. If you spend your entire career with the New York Yankees, you get your number retired, I think you've done some pretty good work. So, all right, last topic of the night is one that a lot of people like to debate, and you guys are going to get a chance to talk about it too. Does Fred McGriff deserve to be inducted? And I'll throw a couple of numbers out there, and then you guys can go from there. 493 home runs, 2,490 hits, played 20 years. what can I say? I personally think Fred McGriff should be in there. Why he's not in there is anybody's guess, but hopefully cooler heads will prevail and he ultimately gets in there so we don't have to talk about it anymore because we know he brings in there. And I know my friend Rick Curdy, who's on vacation for the month of August, has been preaching the drinking the Kool-Aid about Fred McGriff. So all right, Justin, you go ahead and give me your perspective on Fred McGriff.
Sure. I think that first of all, the length of his career itself. He debuted in 1986, and I believe his final year was right around the age of 40. It's interesting to see, just like the longevity that goes into it. And I think this is something, at least judging by the history of different writers, when you look at, what somebody's been able to do, sure, if you have a couple really good years in the middle of an otherwise kind of average career, that maybe doesn't establish you as a perennial player. But looking at, certainly career figures, just like you mentioned, he's put that together to suggest he is of the caliber to do so. But I think probably more importantly, if you just take a look and see his all-star appearances and his MVP finishes, as far as, top 10 MVP placements and, the all-star teams that he made, his first one was when he was 28. His final one was when he was 36 years old. So I think that, that speaks very well to the longevity. I believe that, that's been the measuring stick for the Hall of Fame of how much are you able to show up for it, year after year. This is something that just a couple good years in an isolated span is going to be very difficult to get you in. But I think what Fred McGriff's been able to put together, you see something like this, it certainly turns heads. He was a guy that did it for as long as he did. And I think that, I don't know if that's enough of a rationale to be able to get him over the hump, but I think that definitely speaks volumes for, for what he's been able to put together. He did it for a very long time.
And you know what? He did it clean. All right, Eric.
That's right. There you go.
I do believe the Crime Dog deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He was consistently good for a long period of time, consistently in double figures in home runs. He also has 493 home runs are also good for 29th all time on the MLB list. He's tied with Lou Gehrig, who also a Hall of Famer. And he's ahead of some other Hall of Famers like Willie Stargell, Stan Musial, and Chipper Jones, Dave Winfield, and Carl Yastrzemski and Jeff Bagwell, as well as Vlad Guerrero. Vlad Guerrero got in. As good as Vlad was, you can argue that Fred was better. Fred also did it well in both leagues. That's really hard to do because both leagues are different. I'm really surprised they haven't put Crime Dog in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, me too. All right. Good job, guys. So, all right, Justin, I have one last question for you. Okay, what do you do during seasons here? Do you like, for example, you're preparing for the Arizona Fall League, but when it ends, what do you do during the Arizona Fall League off season?
Sure, absolutely. It's been funny too, as far as, creating a year-round presence for a league that only has about a 2-month span of when we're active. It's something that we've definitely been launching a lot of initiatives with different spring training sites and really trying to, take advantage from a marketing standpoint. That's been a huge thing that we were really able to set in motion last year. So I guess as far as, my other duties and some other work that I've been able to pick up as part of the Fall League, one of the host stadiums that we played at is the spring ballpark of the Chicago Cubs. And you mentioned earlier talking about the networking possibilities that existed in the Fall League. I actually got hired on with the Chicago Cubs last year, and well, I guess for this year for spring training back in March. And it was kind of curious because I didn't know if it was going to happen because of the lockout, but it ended up being certainly one of the more gratifying experiences of my life, being able to get that off the ground and being able to put on a show for a lot of people. So I guess the two duties that I hold right now between where it is media related wise for the Arizona Fall League, I am the ballpark coordinator at Sloan Park, which is the spring home of the Chicago Cubs. So it's very much kind of split time and seasonal right now, but excited to see those guys once the Fall League kicks back up. And it sounds like that is the plan again for spring training coming up. So we got a lot going on down here in Arizona.
We'll have a normal year for the first time in, I think, 3 years.
There you go, man.
Well, so Justin, you brought that up. This one last thing I want to ask you, then you guys will have a chance to identify where you're at. So with that being said, the lockout lasted 99 days this year. Did you have any doubts that spring training would get underway and how they were going to do it under a rush format? What was it like for you being out there?
Man, it was just incredible. It's funny. A lot of the duties that I had as far as, the ballpark setup type of things we knew that as soon as we got the green light, we needed to go. And I was checking. I mean, of course, just being a member of baseball media, I was certainly checking up all of these headlines. But it was like I was obsessive, realizing that the quality of my work was going to be directly reflective on how much we prepare for this. But at the same time, it wasn't like I was the one spending the Cubs money, and if they didn't need to spend money on something that wasn't going to happen, that was another battle that we were facing. So
Right.
it was. I mean, I personally was seeing the way that the voting ended, as far as the final proposal for the collective bargaining agreements. It was the players that inevitably accepted it, and it was the union members of the Players Association that actually rejected it. So I personally thought that there was going to be a bigger standstill. I hate to frame it as the players kind of caved, because I think that's a distasteful way of framing it. But I think that, assuming that, seeing the headlines that I was getting, as far as, this is what the owners are saying, this is what the Players Association is saying, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of cohesiveness all the way up to when it was inevitably lifted. And I think that, if the players were willing to wait it out and get their terms a little bit more in their favor, this could have very well gone in through about July or June at least. But, fortunately for the sake of baseball fans everywhere, we did get the fix that we were looking for. We are going to get 162 games. I think that, it wasn't maybe an equal split, as far as I think the players were forced to make a couple concessions. But I will say, and I don't know if I can, I speak on my own opinion rather than the employers that I work for on this. But, I personally thought it was going to go a little bit longer. But, as a fan of the game, I'm pleased that we were able to get it on the field as quickly as we did.
Yeah, I actually thought, to me, that the players probably gave in. They were afraid of losing all that big money, and that the owners were playing hardball. Either you get 162 or not. Before I sign off here, I want to let everybody know, subscribe to the South Florida Tribune on our YouTube channel, or visit www.southfloridatribune.com, and follow us on Twitter at Tribune South. To advertise, call 954-304-4941. The audio portion of the show can be heard on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. So, folks, please go to youtube.com and look for us, for the South Florida Tribune, and please subscribe. That way we can continue to work our tail off to get you the best possible programming. We have sports and non-sports programming. We had two great young guests on here tonight. Eric's a regular, of course, and Justin's the new guy in the block, who is certainly going to be invited back as often as he wants to come back on. So we're really happy to have them both on tonight. Here are 108 Stitches Baseball Talk, our Hall of Fame edition. I have two young Hall of Famers here right beside me, so I'm really proud that they were able to take part of their evening and provide some insights on not only Hall of Fame, but give you folks an education about the Arizona Fall League and how a lot of prospects that are developed around baseball. The Arizona Fall League, folks, is where a lot of the top prospects go. So with that said, okay, Justin, why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you?
Sure, absolutely. I suppose, the most accessible, I am on Twitter at JustWick, just like it sounds, JustWick. At the same time, there's probably a pretty good chance, if you're at a spring training ballpark in Phoenix, if I'm not at that exact ballpark, I'm going to probably be at one nearby. So certainly looking forward to hopefully meeting a whole lot of people down here in October and November. And if anybody makes their way to the Arizona Fall League, there's a huge chance I will be at that particular game. So hopefully looking forward to meeting a whole lot of people. And, once again, thrilled to be able to be on this show. Very excited to be able to meet some great people. Scott, you've been looking out for me big time, and, thrilled that we were able to make this happen.
Well, there was no doubt I was going to bring you on. It's just a matter of finding the time. The next time you come on, though, you'll be on with Lou Landers and maybe Rick Curdy down the road. But both that were not available tonight. And Eric, to me, is a regular on the show. And I tell you, when I talk about some of my bright young analysts, Eric Hatch, to me, Mr. Concrete Dump. Okay, certainly is one of the more knowledgeable people that talks about the game. Eric is a lot older than what his age indicates, especially with his baseball IQ. And Eric does a phenomenal job, and we're very proud to have him as well. So, all right, Eric, with that said, since I built you up to be what you really are, okay, why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you?
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at Sports Team News, or you can follow me on bellyupsports.com.
Very good. So, well, folks, we had a really fun show tonight. Pleased to welcome Justin Wick to the family, and Eric, of course. It's always good to have you on. Eric Katz also does a good job helping us promote on Twitter, and more importantly, he does a phenomenal job with a program we're getting off the ground here called Fire Up Wisconsin. So you can see him on there plenty as well. So meanwhile, really enjoyed the show having you two guys on tonight, and look forward to doing more episodes with each and every one of you guys. So on behalf of Justin Wick and Eric Katz, my name is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Manmouth. Thank you for joining us on this 108 Stitches Baseball Talk Hall of Fame edition. Until the next time, good night, everybody, and be safe out there. Bye-bye.